Well, it looks like we had another disaster, another crash. Not sure exactly why this time. Got done with my last project, which was the airbox for the backseat heater kit in the Super Cub. Come over and started working on the lathe. I was going to start on a couple of the projects on it. I'd left it kind of a mess. It had chips all over it and stuff. Anyway, I wiped everything all off, got it all cleaned up, and wiped off the lead screw. And I squirted some oil in on the half nuts and along on the lead screw, and I was running the lathe on the lead screw back towards the tailstock. Now, I haven't really run on the lead screw. I haven't done any threading. Most of the stuff I've done has just been in the feed. Well, anyway, I squirted some oil on the lead screw and the half nuts, and I was running it back towards the tailstock, and I was cleaning other things up and lubricating it, all the little points on there and stuff. I noticed it was kind of, I don't know, stopping and starting a little bit, kind of. It almost looked like, I thought it was because the crank handle in the apron was loose. I was watching it, and that's what I thought was wrong. But when the apron carriage got back towards the tailstock, all of a sudden there was a clunk there, and everything kind of stopped. And it hadn't got back to the end. It didn't crash into anything. It just stopped there. So I shut it all down, looked it over, and everything looked fine. I changed it over from the lead screw to the standard drive there, the carriage drive, and I started trying to feed it back to the front. I was oiling that and oiling all those parts, and I wanted to get oil smeared all over everything. And that wasn't working right. Well, I got to looking, and I could see it hopping around up here in the front, the change gears here, the change levers. So I shut everything down and got to investigating, and I was trying to move these change levers back and forth, and this one moved just fine, but this first one here, I guess the primary one, whatever, it was hard to slide. Oh, I thought I'd go ahead and take this cover off and investigate. Looking around there, I couldn't see anything wrong. This was still hard to slide, but couldn't tell. But I got to sticking it back and forth between the lead screw and the carriage drive, and I noticed that the lead screw was binding up a little bit. You could turn it partway, it turned smooth, and then it kind of come into a binding spot. But the feed feeds fine. It's nice and smooth. Kept looking at that and looking at it and moving things around and stuff. And then I could see once I started rotating this shaft in here that these feed levers or these adjustment levers go on is bent. So that's what happened, I guess. What I think is somehow that lead screw is binding up, and I don't know exactly where, but I kind of suspect that it might be in that tail block, the block back there towards the tailstock end of it where it goes in there. I'm kind of thinking that hole might be misdrilled in that. I'm guessing, I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm guessing that lead screw is not lined up perfectly. Somehow it either comes out away from the bed of the lathe or goes into it or goes up or down or something like that, so that the farther the carriage gets away from the headstock, the closer it gets to the tailstock, the more it's binding. And it finally just got to the point where everything was just out of a line so much that it put so much pressure on things that it pushed these gears out of contact with the gear train and caused that shaft to bend. So that's where we're at so far. I guess what I'm going to do is take this change gearbox off and see if there's any other damage in there, and I'm going to try to figure out what's wrong with that lead screw, why it's binding up there, because it doesn't do it on the feed, the carriage feed at all. It runs smooth all the way from one end to the other, but for some reason this lead screw is binding up. So we have to figure out either it's binding up here where it comes out of the change gear case, or there's something wrong on the other end where that block is, the bearing block on the tail. I kind of suspect that that's what it is, because when I put oil in it, that has never received oil quite right. You can't get oil to push in that, and the feed shaft that takes oil just fine. That bearing block doesn't have any bearings in it or any bushings in it. It's just cast iron and just drilled out. And if that hole was misdrilled, not properly aligned, that could be what the problem is. That's what I suspect the problem is, but it's going to take some further investigation. So I could make a new shaft for that. It's not too complicated. It's just a shaft. It does have a groove all the way down it for the gears, the keys and the gears here to ride in. And I don't really have a way to mill that out. I could figure out a way to do it on the lathe, but I'm not a machinist. I'm not that experienced, and I have too many other things to do to take the time out to experiment with that, to play with it and figure it out. So the easiest for me and the cheapest is just to go ahead and order one from Grizzly. Sunday today, I could call them tomorrow and do it, but I'm going to take that change gear case off there first and make sure that there's no other damage in there, and try to figure out what's going on with that lead screw to see why it's binding up before I do anything else. That's the project right now. The other crash that I had was strictly my fault for not paying attention. This one I didn't do anything wrong on. Like I said, I have not used the feed screw, the lead screw at all. I haven't done any thread cutting on the lathe. That was something for the future to learn how to do, and I was just running it just to get oil spread on it and stuff. There was no load on it. It wasn't engaged. There was no knife. There was no cutting. It was just pulling the carriage down the bed, and like I said, it didn't get to the end or anything. It didn't crash into anything. It just bound up. Well, this is the gear train here. This is where the input shaft is that comes from the lathe gearbox down here to the quick change gearbox. And then you've got the gears in here, and then all the change gears over here. Well, these spin pretty good here, these finer gears, this long chain of gears here. But these ones here on this first one, they bind up when they get to a certain point. They come around 180 degrees or so, and they just stop. So there's something going on in there too. So that's going to take some further disassembly and inspection. Oh, I'm going to need to go dig out my gear pullers and bring them up here so I can pull the gears off of here and stuff, and take those shafts out of there and inspect those and figure out exactly what all I need before I start trying to order parts. Now, I don't know whether those are bent or what the heck, but of course the only way to find out is to take it apart. Rather than running back and forth between here and the basement with my tools, I brought this quick change gearbox down here to the shop. Just greased it, oiled it up and everything, and so it was pretty oily. So first thing I did was set it outside and get the part sprayer out and sprayed it down with paint thinner, get all the oil and stuff off of it, so it's a lot cleaner than it was. You can see this thing's binding up right here now for some reason, this main gear. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pull the bearing off of this lever shaft. This is the levers for the quick change here, and I'm going to pull this off. I know this shaft is bent, so that's got to come off there and be replaced, but that'll give me better access to everything else, and I'll be able to see what's going on. Most of this stuff looks like it's okay, but something is haywire in here in this input shaft and where it gears in there. So first thing I'll do again is pull the bearing off of here so I can take this out of there and get it out of the way. And I'll pull the bearing off the end of this input shaft, or the gear off the input shaft, and then we'll see where we go from there. Well, I've got my parts list printed out here. I just went up, I've got a copy of it, a PDF file on the computer, and so rather than getting the manual from Grizzly and using it for a working copy, I just printed off the pages of it here. Oh, I can keep that as a reference to how this thing comes apart and hopefully how it goes back together. Well, I've got my puller set up here to pull that bearing off that shaft, and this is the type of puller I need for that. This is a flat plate bearing puller, and got a hole in it, fits around the shaft, and then the plate here supports against the race of the bearing. If I used a standard claw puller like this, it might pull the outer race off the bearing or distort it to the point where it didn't work right. So this is what I've got set up. And this is Foremost Tools, probably out of Harbor Freight. And the plate here is fine, but the hardware for this is marginal. I've used this before, and these studs here that go into this plate are already bent. I bent those the first time I used it, so it's kind of off. But anyway, that's what we got. Now I'm not even going to be able to get that sucker off that end. I'm going to have to pull the bearing off the other end. That's bent so bad. Alright, I got that shaft off there. It's got a pretty good kink in it right here. Straight down and then a big kink in it. You can feel it when you go around like that, actually. So that much is off. Now I'll go ahead and pull this gear off of here. And for this gear, I'm going to go ahead and use a puller like this. You know, I might go ahead and use this other puller on that, because I want it on the, if I use this one, that's going to put pressure on those teeth. And so I've got this one all set up already, so I might as well use it on that one too. Okay, that stuff's out of the way. I'm going to take the handle off, the shift handle here. This is the selector handle for between, it selects between driving the lead screw and the feed, carriage feed. I'll take that off there before it gets messed up too. This shaft that runs these change gears on here is different diameters as it goes down, and there's a keyway that runs along it. This here is the gear that shifts back and forth between the two different screws, the two different drives, between the lead screw and the carriage drive. And then this is gears for the input, or for the change gears here, and I've taken a punch and driven this out. This shaft goes from this face over here. This is the outside face, or the back side of the headstock, and this would be the front side where the lead screw is and stuff on it. This shaft gets driven out from this back face out through the screw side, the working side. So the first set of gears is off there. They go in this bay right here, and we've got this small gear, then we've got a large double gear, and then there's a spacer washer, and then another large double gear. And I think these gears are the same numbers, look in the parts and to see, but then there's a spacer, and those go in here, right in there like that. And then we've got these gears here, all individual gears, and of course they just go from larger to smaller. So I need a drift to get in there to finish pushing that through. Well, I've got this second shaft out of there, and it doesn't appear to be bent. I don't see any sign of it being bent, so that's good news. So this is the input shaft here, and the gears on it, and then this is the other gears. And as they'd turn around 7, this one would turn around 7 turns, and then it would bind up in that other gear set. Well, these two gears are turning free on there, and these are not, so it's got to be something wrong with these two gears here. This has 2 points of oil for these gears here. There's this hole right here, and that all that does is oil this bearing point right here. And then there's this hole up here, and that's where you're supposed to squirt oil into the whole thing. What all that does is just go right in there into that gallery. Oh, I see what it does. It squirts oil in here to this top, and then it fills this top up, and then it runs down through ports here in the top. So you'd want to fill this whole gallery up here, this whole piece up here with oil, so it drained down through there, depend on gravity to drain down through there into the rest, into all of the gears. There's also a little port right here to run oil down into this feed screw or feed shaft where it goes through there, and that one is covered up with the cover that goes over this, and you can't really see it. It's hard to get in there to that. So these holes right here correspond to these bosses right here, so they must be drilled down through. There's two holes here over each one of these pivot points, like right here where this fits in there for a bearing, and then right here where this fits in there with a bearing. This one right, this other boss over here where this shaft goes through, it didn't look like it had a place for oil on it on the outside. And then there's one here that goes down to this one. But those don't lube the gears, they just lube these bearing points right here. Okay, so I don't see anything wrong with these gears. I'll have to do a little closer inspection with them underneath the magnifying glass, but I don't see anything on those. But there's a circlamp right there. I'll take that off. That holds that gear on there. That holds everything together there. I got this main shaft out, and it took a little bit because it had spring clip on it here, and I found my clip pliers finally, but I was going down at an angle. I couldn't get them to open up. I finally found my angle ones. I was able to get it off. These first rollers on that spin freely, but they're just held on with that C-clip. And then the second rollers, the second set of gears are fixed, and there's a small key in there. You can't really see that. Well, anyway, I tried driving that through. I took the shaft for the carriage feed rod out, so that I could run a drift in through there and just kind of tap that out. Well, it came out and came to a stop, of course, because this key come up against this boss. So I tapped it back in there a little bit, and then as I moved this one gear set forward on the shaft, then that exposed that key, and it's just a short little key, so you can get it in there, get it out of there just by sliding those gears forward on that a little bit. Looking at this, it almost looks like it's bent just a little bit, but that may be just an optical illusion because of the oil grooves in here and this circlip, E-clip, C-clip groove that's in here. So I put a straight edge up against it, and I can't see any daylight in there. It can't see where it's bent any at all. So I'm going to take this up and put it in the chuck, in the lathe, and then use an indicator on it to see if it's bent. It doesn't appear to be bent. Well, I don't know why that thing was binding up the way it was. Well, there's a little lump right there, but that may be, oh, that's just something on the table. And looking at it, it almost looks like it's got a bend in it, but these spirals here for this oil channel on there just make it an optical illusion. Anyway, the thing's all apart. The only thing I don't have off there is the drive for the feed screw itself, the lead screw itself.